You may think that your wedding night was stressful, but trust me, it could have been so much worse. Here are some terrifying secrets of the medieval wedding night that you won't learn anywhere else. No, and no. Saying no. If you didn't want to get married in the Middle Ages, there really wasn't any way out of it. If your parents had arranged your marriage and you weren't keen on marrying your new spouse, well, too bad. You were expected to go through with the ceremony whether you liked it or not. And if you refused, you were considered a very naughty girl. Your reputation would be ruined. You'd never find a husband and you'd be shunned by society. Men were expected to marry, and if they refused, they'd be looked down upon as well. There wasn't even such a thing as divorce. So once you said, I do, you were stuck with this person for life. You couldn't get out of it unless one of you died. So yeah, no saying no back then. Number 9, the first night. We all know what the first night is, but it was so common in the Middle Ages that people actually made laws against it. In fact, the first night was something so normal that it was even joked about in artwork. Paintings from the era depicted scenes from the wedding night, often showing a bride screaming while her new husband carried her off to bed. It was during the first night that a man proved his virility. He had to show that he was able to sleep with his bride and hopefully get her pregnant. In fact, there were entire pamphlets written about how to perform well on your wedding night. Talk about a nightmare. And if the bride wasn't a virgin, which most weren't, she was judged and harassed by other women. No, 8. A dowry to die for. One of the worst things about being a woman in the Middle Ages was something called the dowry. This was a gift of money given to the groom by the bride's family. Essentially, it was payment for the privilege of marrying their daughter. Now, you might be thinking that this sounds pretty messed up, and you're right. But it was an even bigger problem when the Black Death hit. During the plague, there were so few women around that their families had to pool their resources just to come up with a decent dowry. Families would often take loans, sell property, or even kill someone in order to come up with enough money. Sometimes they would murder their own daughters and collect on the insurance money. Yikes. 7. Blood weddings. Imagine getting married, walking down the aisle, exchanging vows, only to be interrupted by a fight that breaks out and someone gets stabbed. Well, unfortunately, this actually happened quite frequently during the Middle Ages. The worst part, was usually the bride's family who got into a brawl with the groom's side. They fought over just how much the dowry was going to be, or sometimes they got into drunken fisticuffs. It wasn't uncommon for these fights to break out and cause a massive scene. And in some cases, the violence continued long after the ceremony. At times, the bride's family would storm the reception, attack the groom, and kidnap the bride, taking her back to her family's home instead of letting her consummate the marriage. I guess that's one way to call off the wedding. No, 6, kiss and tell. Back in the Middle Ages, there was a popular game called the bridal bet game. It was a bit like spin the bottle, except it involved the entire wedding party. Everyone would gather around the bed and start kissing. Then they'd move on to more intimate activities until everyone had slept with everyone. It was a celebration of fertility and lust. And of course, the bride and groom were right in the middle of it. But here's the thing. The whole point of the game was that it had to be done in secret. If anyone found out, the bride and groom were supposed to keep quiet. It was their little secret. But the problem was that guests didn't always play along. They would boast about their experiences with the bride, and then she would become known as the girl who slept with everybody at her wedding. No, 5, spit to get it. If you wanted to be absolutely sure that your wife was a virgin before the wedding, there was only one surefire way to find out. In the Middle Ages, they used a very scientific method of inspecting the hymen to determine if a woman had slept with someone else. Not only did they use this method to check the bride, but also the mother of the bride, the grandmother of the bride, and every female relative of the bride. To do this, a woman would be laid on a table and inspected thoroughly. The hymen was torn open and examined. If it was torn, she wasn't a virgin. It goes without saying that this was extremely painful. There wasn't any anesthesia back then, and the procedure was performed by an old, hairy midwife who had seen it all. Number 4, forbidden fruit. During the Middle Ages, sex was not only encouraged on your wedding night, it was encouraged before the wedding night. Courtship was a time for lovers to get busy and get the bride pregnant, and this wasn't frowned upon at all. In fact, people would rent rooms near the place where the wedding was happening, just so that the couple could sneak off and sleep together. Sometimes it was encouraged because the faster the bride became pregnant, the sooner she would bear children and produce more workers. But it also made for some pretty awkward encounters. Imagine running into your future mother-in-law while hiding under a blanket with your lover. No, 3, you can't sit with us. Wedding receptions were wild back in the Middle Ages. It was a huge celebration that could last for days. There was drinking, dancing, singing, and lots of merriment. Basically, it was like a giant music festival with better food. The weirdest part was that the bride and groom weren't allowed to sit together at the reception. They were separated on opposite sides of the room with their respective families. The newlyweds weren't allowed to speak to each other at all. In fact, they were forbidden to look at each other. What kind of wedding reception would you like to attend? Would you rather go back to the Middle Ages, or would you prefer something more modern? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos. No, 2, don't call the cops. Back in the Middle Ages, crimes were committed at weddings all the time, and it wasn't just the usual petty crimes either. People regularly got murdered at wedding receptions. When you had so many people gathered together in one spot, it was bound to happen. But even though there were crimes happening left and right, it was nearly impossible to get any justice. That's because during the Middle Ages, it was forbidden to summon the sheriff or any other law enforcement officer to a wedding. If you had a problem, you were basically on your own. This led to all kinds of issues, including murder, rape, and even cannibalism. Yeah, I'm not kidding. In 1484, 4 men attending a wedding were caught eating the body of a young girl. No, 1 killer bridesmaids. Bridesmaids aren't known for being the most pleasant people around. They're always bossing you around and telling you how to do things. But at least they never try to murder you. Unless you were a bride in the Middle Ages, having bridesmaids was a death sentence. These women were jealous of the bride and wanted her dead. Why? Because they wanted to be the bride. See, back in the Middle Ages, bridesmaids were chosen based on their beauty. The prettier the bridesmaid, the more likely she was to end up being the bride someday. But that meant that she also resented the current bride. Bridesmaids would often plot ways to get rid of the bride so they could take her place. Some of them even went as far as poisoning the bride, murdering her, and pinning it on someone else. Talk about a killer bridesmaid. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you haven't already. And here's another video you might enjoy.